The war room was filled with the buzzing of alien voices, a mix of irritation and impatience. At the head of the table, Grail, a towering figure with scaled skin and 4 eyes, drummed his claws on the metallic surface. His gaze flickered toward the holographic display in the center of the room, showing the gathering fleets. Various ships, sleek and advanced, were preparing for what would be one of the most decisive battles of the galactic war. Except one fleet, small and unimpressive, hovered at the edge of the display, the human fleet. "They're really going to show up in those?" Grail muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. His gaze shifted to the small, bulky human ships barely moving into position. "We should have left them behind. They'll be more of a burden than help." Across the room, General Neor, leader of the sleek and powerful Cinder fleet, nodded in agreement. "I don't understand why they're even here. Their technology is decades behind ours. Railguns, missile carriers. These humans must be delusional if they think they stand a chance." The others around the table chuckled, except one. A young diplomat named Ilrin, representing a minor species in the coalition, sat quietly, observing. He had heard of humans and their surprising ability to adapt, but he knew better than to speak up in a room full of hardened warlords. Meanwhile, far from the mocking voices, aboard the human mothership Resolute, Commander Harlan stood on the bridge, surveying the scene through the massive viewing window. His officers were busy at their stations, preparing for the battle ahead. They knew the aliens looked down on them, but that didn't matter. "Status report, Lieutenant," Harlan said, his voice calm and commanding. Lieutenant Mara, standing at attention, responded quickly. "All systems green, sir. Our ships are in position." Harlan nodded, satisfied. The human fleet might not be as flashy or advanced as the others, but they had something the aliens didn't: a plan. A strategy that no one, not even their own allies, would expect. He turned toward the communication panel and opened a channel to the rest of his fleet. "This is Commander Harlan. We've been underestimated, and that's exactly where we want to be. Stay sharp. The enemy thinks we're weak, and our so-called allies think we're cannon fodder. We'll show them otherwise. Hold your positions. Wait for my signal." The bridge fell silent after his words, a quiet confidence settling over the crew. They had something to prove, and they knew this battle would be their chance. Back in the alien war room, Grail leaned forward, squinting at the human fleet on the display. "I almost feel sorry for them," he said with a grin. "When the Harkat fleet arrives, those human ships will be the first to go down." As the room erupted in laughter, Irin couldn't help but wonder if the humans had more to offer than their crude ships suggested. He had heard tales of their resilience, their ability to turn the tide when all seemed lost. But looking at the human fleet now, even he found it hard to believe. In the distance, the vast expanse of space shimmered as the Harkat fleet began to arrive on the battlefield. Their ships, sleek and deadly, formed a tight formation, their weapon systems lighting up as they prepared to engage. The time for battle was drawing near. The alien coalition prepared their advanced weaponry, positioning themselves for the first wave of attacks. The humans, however, remained still, waiting at the edges of the battlefield. Grail smirked. "Let's see how long they last." Commander Harlan watched as the Harkat ships came into view on the Resolute's tactical display. He could feel the tension rising on the bridge, but he remained calm. They were ready. The plan was already in motion. He leaned toward his comm panel and opened a secure channel to his fleet. "Hold steady. Let them laugh. We've got surprises they can't even imagine." With that, the stage was set, and the battle for survival was about to begin. The first shots of the battle echoed through the stars, energy beams and missiles streaking between the alien coalition and the Harkat fleet. The advanced alien ships engaged the enemy with precision, their weapons systems sophisticated and deadly. But amid the chaos, the human fleet remained unmoved, hovering on the fringes, ignored by both friend and foe alike. In the war room, Grail was leaning back in his chair, satisfied as the alien forces clashed with the Harkat. "See, The humans don't even have the courage to engage, he sneered, watching as the holographic display lit up with flashes of battle. They're just waiting to be picked off like the weaklings they are. General Neo chuckled, his sleek, angular face breaking into a cold grin. They'll probably try to retreat once things get too heated. No doubt they're already regretting being here. Illyrin, however, wasn't so sure. He had been watching the humans carefully. Despite their seemingly antiquated ships, there was something deliberate about their movements. While the other species rushed into battle, the humans held back, observing, waiting. It wasn't cowardice, it was calculation. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I don't think they're retreating," Illyrin said quietly, but his voice was drowned out by the ongoing banter of the alien warlords. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, Commander Harlan paced the bridge, keeping a close eye on the tactical display. The human fleet remained at the edge of the battlefield, perfectly in formation, while the Harkat forces engaged the alien coalition in the distance. Lieutenant Mara stood beside him, her face tense. "Sir, the coalition is getting hammered by the Harkat. Should we assist them?" Harlan shook his head, his expression calm and unreadable. "Not yet. Let them weaken each other first. When the moment comes, we'll strike. Until then, we stay out of the chaos." The crew continued to work, the quiet hum of the bridge a stark contrast to the explosions lighting up the battlefield outside. They all knew their orders: patience. The aliens might be superior in technology, but humanity had mastered the art of timing. Suddenly, the comms officer turned toward Harlan, his voice low but urgent. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from several coalition ships. They're requesting support. The Harkat are pushing hard." Harlan glanced at the incoming messages, his face showing no sign of surprise. "Let them sweat," he muttered under his breath, then turned to his crew. "Hold position." Tension mounted as the Harkat forces continued to press forward, their attacks decimating the alien coalition ships. One after another, the alien vessels fell, their advanced technology no match for the sheer brutality and efficiency of the Harkat war machine. The coalition was struggling, and Grail's confidence began to waver. "What are the humans doing?" Grail growled, his 4 eyes locked on the display. "They're just sitting there while we fight their battle." General Neo scowled, his hands tightening into fists. "Cowards. I knew we couldn't trust them." But just as Grail was about to issue a command to bypass the humans and engage the Harkat alone, the tactical display lit up with new signals. Dozens of them. Human ships, previously hidden in the shadow of the Resolute, were suddenly on the move. Commander Harlan's voice cut through the static on the open channel. "This is Harlan. All units engage." The human fleet surged forward, their rail gunships moving into formation with unexpected precision. The bulky missile carriers, once thought to be slow and cumbersome, took strategic positions along the flanks of the Harkat forces. From the Resolute, a wave of smaller, faster vessels emerged, darting into the fray with blinding speed. On the bridge of the Resolute, Lieutenant Mara's eyes widened as the battle unfolded. "Sir, the enemy is trying to adjust their formation to counter us." Harlan's lips curled into a small smile. "Good, they'll be too slow." And they were. The Harkat forces, used to facing alien fleets with predictable strategies, were caught off guard by the humans' unconventional tactics. The rail gunships, once mocked for their sluggishness, unleashed a relentless barrage of high-velocity projectiles, ripping through the enemy's shields and hulls with devastating accuracy. The missile carriers, once thought to be too slow to be effective, launched their payloads from a distance, overwhelming the Harkat defenses with sheer volume, and the smaller ships, darting between the larger vessels, harassed the enemy relentlessly, forcing them to split their attention between multiple threats. In the war room, Grail's eyes widened in disbelief as the holographic display shifted. What is this?" Illyrin, for the first time, allowed himself a small smile. It looks like the humans had a plan all along. The room fell silent as the alien warlords watched the humans tear through the Harkat forces, their once mocked fleet proving to be far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Grail clenched his fists, his arrogance evaporating as he realized the truth. The humans were not weak. They were patient, and now they were winning. As the battle raged on, Commander Harlan remained calm, his eyes focused on the tactical display. "Maintain formation," he ordered, his voice steady. "We've got them on the ropes." And indeed, the tide of battle was turning. The Harkat forces, once so dominant, were now faltering under the relentless assault of the human fleet. Their ships, scattered and disorganized, struggled to hold the line. In the distance, the Resolute moved forward, its presence looming over the battlefield like a giant. The Mothership, once dismissed as nothing more than a bulky relic, was about to reveal its true power. The battle was far from over, but the humans had already done the impossible. They had survived, and now they were poised to strike the final blow. The battle begins. The stars around the battlefield burned bright, streaks of light cutting through the void as explosions rippled from ship to ship. The human fleet, once dismissed as primitive and slow, had fully entered the fray, their tactics precise and ruthless. Alien warlords who had mocked them moments ago now watched in stunned silence as the human ships tore through the Harkat forces. Grail, sitting in the war room with clenched fists, couldn't believe what he was seeing. His eyes darted between the holographic display and the real-time feeds of the battle. How are they doing this?" he growled, his voice thick with frustration. Ilrin, leaning forward in his chair, remained calm. "They've been waiting for this moment. They were never meant to lead the charge. They are the finisher." As the battle continued, the human ships coordinated their attacks with a precision the alien fleet struggled to match. The rail gunships, which had been mocked for their slow-turning speed, now revealed their true power, long-range precision strikes. In formation, they created a deadly grid of fire, overwhelming the enemy with constant, crushing blows. The Harkat ships that had once moved confidently through space were now scrambling to avoid the brutal bombardments. Commander Harlan stood tall on the bridge of the Resolute, his sharp eyes fixed on the tactical display. Every movement of the enemy fleet was being tracked, every shift in their formation anticipated. His officers were focused, carrying out his orders with precision and calm. There was no chaos on this bridge, only control. "Status report on the Harkat formation," Harlan asked, his voice cutting through the silence of the bridge. Lieutenant Mora quickly responded, "The enemy is trying to regroup. They're repositioning their heavier ships to the front, but our missile carriers are disrupting their flanks. Their formation is collapsing." Harlan nodded, his gaze never leaving the display. "Good. Push them harder. They don't know how to deal with us." On the battlefield, the human missile carriers, once dismissed as slow and outdated, were proving to be a devastating force. Their ability to launch overwhelming missile barrages from long range had caught the Harkat forces off guard. For every missile they tried to intercept, 3 more slipped through, crashing into their ships and leaving trails of debris in their wake. The smaller, faster human ships continued their relentless assault, darting between the Harkat vessels and drawing their fire away from the main human forces. The Harkat, clearly unaccustomed to this kind of coordinated harassment, found themselves spread thin, their focus divided between defending against missile barrages, dodging rail gun shots, and chasing down the human ships that danced around them like gnats. Grail slammed his fist against the table in frustration. "This is impossible. They shouldn't be winning, not with those ships." Ilrin remained quiet, his eyes fixed on the display. Deep down, he knew what Grail couldn't admit. The humans weren't winning because of their technology. They were winning because of their strategy. Every move they made was deliberate, calculated. While the aliens had thrown themselves headlong into battle, relying on their technological superiority, the humans had waited, analyzed, and struck when the moment was right. In the distance, the Resolute loomed ever closer to the center of the battlefield, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the chaos below. The alien fleets had largely ignored the human mothership, focusing instead on the smaller ships, causing immediate damage. But as the Harkat's formation broke down, it became clear that the Resolute was far from a mere command center. It was a weapon in itself. "Sir," Lieutenant Mara spoke again, her voice tinged with urgency. "The Harkat are regrouping, but they've still got their heaviest ships intact. They're rallying for a counterattack." Harlan glanced at the display, watching as the Harkat's larger warships, bristling with weaponry, began to move into a tighter formation. They were planning something big, one final push to break the coalition's defenses. He smiled grimly. "They're going to throw everything at us now. Let them. Prepare to deploy the Resolute's strike wings." The bridge crew exchanged quick glances, their expressions tightening in anticipation. The Resolute, despite its massive size and seemingly cumbersome design, had a secret weapon: hundreds of strike vessels hidden within its vast hangars, waiting to be unleashed. With a flick of his hand, Harlan gave the order: "Launch the strike wings." The colossal ship rumbled, its hangar bays opening wide as the first wave of strike vessels poured out, spreading across the battlefield like a swarm of locusts. These ships were faster than anything the Harkat had faced before, small but incredibly agile, their pilots expertly weaving through the debris and enemy fire. On the Harkat flagship, alarms blared as their sensors picked up the new wave of human ships. The enemy commander barked orders, scrambling to adapt to the sudden change in the battlefield. But it was too late. The human strike wings were already in position, launching coordinated attacks that targeted the Harkat's remaining heavy ships. Back on the Resolute, Harlan watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Harkat's last-ditch effort to regroup was falling apart under the relentless assault of the human strike wings. Their heaviest warships, once thought to be invincible, were now vulnerable, their defenses overwhelmed by the speed and precision of the human attacks. The alien warlords in the command room were speechless. Grail, who had spent the entire battle mocking the humans, sat in stunned silence, unable to process what he was seeing. Irin broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. The humans planned for this. They were never meant to be the cannon fodder. They were the key to winning all along. Grail gritted his teeth, his pride bruised. But there was no denying the truth. The humans had done what no one else could. They had turned the tide of the battle. And as the Harkat forces began to crumble, retreating in disarray, it became clear that victory belonged to humanity. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of, and their allies, reluctant as they were, could no longer deny the strength of the human fleet. As the Harkat's flagship detonated in a massive explosion, sending shockwaves through the battlefield, Commander Harlan stood tall on the bridge of the Resolute, his voice calm and steady as ever. The debris of shattered Harkat ships drifted through space like a silent graveyard, and yet the battle still raged on. Despite the damage inflicted by the human fleet, the Harkat forces were far from defeated. Their remaining warships regrouped quickly, forming a defensive line around their flagship, refusing to give up ground. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Harlan watched the tactical display with cold determination. The human strike wings had done their job, weakening the enemy and forcing them into a defensive posture. Now, the real test was ahead. "Sir," Lieutenant Mara spoke, her voice tense. "The Harkat are pulling their heavy artillery ships forward. It looks like they're preparing for a counterattack." Harlan nodded, already anticipating their next move. The Harkat were a species of brutal efficiency, and their warships were known for their heavy firepower. If they managed to regroup and focus their artillery on the human fleet, even the Resolute could be at risk. But Harlan wasn't about to let that happen. He leaned over to the comms officer. "Send orders to the railgun fleet. Tell them to target the artillery ships. We need to break their line before they can fire." The comms officer quickly relayed the command, and moments later, the human rail gunships, Those once derided for their slow maneuverability adjusted their positions. Massive barrels swiveled, locking onto the Harket's artillery vessels. Harlan turned back to the tactical display. Prepare for the next phase. The Harket are going to hit us with everything they have. We'll be ready. The air on the Resolute's bridge was thick with tension as the crew awaited the inevitable retaliation. Outside, the human fleet moved with precise coordination, positioning themselves for the oncoming storm. The smaller strike vessels continued to harass the enemy, forcing the Harkat to spread their forces thin. Meanwhile, the missile carriers, slow and methodical, fired wave after wave of long-range ordnance, creating chaos in the enemy ranks. From the corner of the bridge, Lieutenant Mara kept a close eye on the Harkat movements. "Sir, they're charging their main batteries. We have less than 2 minutes before they fire." Harlan's face remained impassive. "They won't get the chance. Initiate Phase 3. At his command, the Resolute's hangar base opened once more, but this time it wasn't strike wings that emerged. Instead, large, shielded drones swarmed out, forming a protective barrier in front of the human fleet. These drones were designed for one purpose: to absorb incoming fire. While the Harkat artillery ships powered up their main weapons, the drones took position, ready to intercept whatever the enemy threw their way. The Harkat, sensing that their time was running out, launched a desperate counteroffensive. Their artillery ships unleashed a torrent of heavy plasma fire, the beams of energy cutting through space with terrifying force. But the human defense drones held the line, absorbing the brunt of the attack with their reinforced shields. Some were destroyed in the process, but they had done their job. The human fleet remained intact. On the bridge of the Resolute, Harlan watched as the tactical display lit up with red markers, indicating the damage the drones had taken. "Now," he said, his voice low but commanding, "Railgun fleet, fire." The human railgun ships responded instantly, releasing a barrage of high-velocity projectiles. The kinetic force of the railguns was unmatched, and the projectiles tore through the Harkat artillery ships like paper, obliterating their hulls and sending debris scattering across the battlefield. Grail, watching from the war room, stood in stunned silence. The alien warlords around him were equally shocked. The humans had just neutralized the Harkat's most dangerous weapons with a combination of defensive tactics and overwhelming firepower. It was a level of coordination and strategic depth that none of them had anticipated. "How?" Grail muttered, his voice barely audible. "How are they doing this?" Ilrin, standing beside him, allowed himself a small smile. "The humans have been underestimated for far too long. This is what they do best. They adapt, they survive, and they turn the tide when no one expects it." But the battle was far from over. Despite the destruction of their artillery ships, the Harkat were not ready to retreat. Their remaining warships, including their heavily armed flagship, began to push forward, determined to make one final stand. Harlan, sensing the shift in the enemy's tactics, quickly adjusted his strategy. "All ships, hold the line. Do not let them break through." The human fleet, already battered from the earlier exchanges, regrouped and braced for the Harkat's final assault. The enemy flagship, bristling with weaponry, led the charge, its cannons firing relentlessly as it closed the distance between the two fleets. Lieutenant Mara's voice broke through the tense silence. "Sir, the flagship is targeting us. They're going to try to take out the Resolute." Harlan's expression hardened. "Not if we take them out first. All units, focus fire on the flagship." The command was met with a flurry of activity. The human rail gunships adjusted their aim, the missile carriers launched another wave of ordnance, and the strike wings darted in and out of the fray, delivering precise hits to the enemy's weak points. The combined firepower of the human fleet was focused entirely on the Harkat flagship. The enemy commander, realizing the precariousness of his situation, ordered his ship to push forward, hoping to take out the Resolute in a suicidal charge. Plasma beams and missiles lit up the space between the two fleets, but the human ships held their ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human missiles found their mark. A series of explosions rocked the Harkat flagship, sending shockwaves through its hull. The once mighty vessel began to break apart, pieces of it drifting into the void as its core reactors went critical. The bridge of the Resolute was silent as the crew watched the destruction unfold. The Harkat flagship, the pride of their fleet, was no more. Lieutenant Mara exhaled slowly, her voice shaking with disbelief. "We did it. The flagship is gone." Harlan allowed himself a small nod. "We're not finished yet. Keep pushing. We don't stop until the last of them is gone." As the remnants of the Harkat fleet began to retreat, the human forces surged forward, determined to finish what they had started. The alien warlords, watching from a distance, could only stare in awe as the humans, those they had once ridiculed, delivered the final blow. The tide of battle had turned, and for the first time in galactic history, humanity stood victorious against an enemy far more powerful than themselves. The wreckage of the Harkat flagship drifted slowly, its hulking remains a testament to the power and precision of the human fleet. But despite the destruction of their flagship, the Harkat forces were not yet ready to surrender. Their remaining ships, though battered, regrouped and began a desperate attempt to flee the battlefield. But Commander Harlan was not about to let them escape. "Pursuit course," Harlan ordered, his voice steady but firm. "We're not giving them a chance to regroup." Lieutenant Mara quickly relayed the command to the fleet. The human ships, already in motion, shifted their formation to pursue the fleeing Harkat vessels. The Resolute moved forward with calm, calculated purpose, while the smaller human strike wings darted ahead, intercepting and harassing the retreating enemy ships. Missiles streaked across the void, and the rail guns continued to fire with devastating accuracy. On the alien side, panic was setting in. The Harkat, known for their ruthless efficiency, had never faced such a coordinated and overwhelming response. Their attempts to retreat were met with relentless pressure from the human fleet, which seemed to anticipate their every move. The Harkat ships, once confident in their superiority, were now fighting for their very survival. In the war room, Grail's arrogance had completely evaporated. His 4 eyes were wide with disbelief as he watched the tactical display. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "We've never seen the Harkat routed like this." Ilrin stood beside him, his arms crossed. "Perhaps now you understand. The humans are not weak. They're adaptable. They fight smart, not just hard." The other alien warlords, once mocking and dismissive of the humans, now remained silent. They had witnessed the impossible. Humanity, with its outdated technology and limited resources, had managed to outmaneuver and overpower the Harkat, one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. As the battle raged on, the Resolute continued its advance. The remaining Harkat ships were scattered, their formation completely shattered. One by one, they were picked off by the human strike wings, which moved with deadly precision, exploiting every weakness in the enemy's defenses. On the bridge of the Resolute, Harlan stood tall, his gaze never leaving the tactical display. He had known from the beginning that the key to victory wasn't in matching the enemy's firepower, it was in outsmarting them. And now, as the Harkat fleet crumbled before him, his strategy was paying off. "Sir," Lieutenant Mara spoke, her voice filled with a sense of awe. "We're receiving transmissions from the remaining Harkat ships. They're signaling a full retreat." Harlan allowed himself a brief nod. "We've broken their back, but we're not done yet. All ships, continue the pursuit. Don't let them get away." The human fleet surged forward, determined to finish the job. Railgun ships moved into position, launching one final barrage of high-velocity projectiles at the retreating enemy. The Harkat ships, once so imposing, were now little more than targets, easy prey for the human fleet that had, against all odds, dominated the battlefield. The remaining Harkat ships scattered, their once unified fleet now reduced to a chaotic scramble for survival. As the human strike wings continued to harass the stragglers, several Harkat ships exploded, unable to withstand the relentless assault. In the span of a few minutes, the once mighty Harkat fleet had been all but destroyed. Back in the war room, the alien warlords watched in stunned silence. Grail, who had mocked the humans from the start, was now speechless. The tables had turned, and the humans, those they had all ridiculed, had proven themselves to be the key to victory. Ilrin, sensing the shift in mood, spoke up. "It seems we all owe the humans an apology. Without them, we would not have survived this battle." Grail said nothing, his pride too wounded to acknowledge the truth, but the other warlords nodded in agreement. They had seen enough to understand that the humans were no longer the weak link in the coalition. They were the unexpected champions. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, Harlan continued to direct the battle, his calm demeanor never wavering. The human fleet had successfully decimated the Harkat forces, but there was still work to be done. "Sir," Lieutenant Mara spoke again, her voice steady. "The remaining Harkat ships are breaking away. We have them on the run." Harlan looked over the tactical display, watching as the last remnants of the Harkat fleet tried to make their escape. "Let them run," he said after a moment of consideration. "We've done enough." The crew of the Resolute let out a collective breath of relief. The battle had been long and hard fought, but the victory was theirs. The humans had not only survived, they had turned the tide and led their allies to an overwhelming victory. As the remaining Harkat ships fled into the void, disappearing from the tactical display, Harlan turned to his crew. "Good work, everyone. We've sent a message today, one that won't be forgotten." The bridge erupted in cheers, the tension of the battle finally giving way to the exhilaration of victory. The human fleet, once dismissed as a laughingstock, had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with, and as the Resolute powered down its weapons and began its slow return to the Coalition's staging area, the galaxy itself would remember this day. But even as the crew celebrated, Harlan knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had made its mark, but the galaxy was vast, and many more challenges lay ahead. The real question was not whether they could win this battle, it was whether they could continue to adapt and survive in the dangerous universe they now called home. The war was far from over, but the humans had shown they were ready for whatever came next. Their ingenuity, their resilience, and their unshakable will had carried them through, and now they stood taller than ever before. As the last remnants of the Harkat fleet vanished into the blackness of space, the human fleet regrouped, a sense of unity and triumph sweeping over the Resolute and its sister ships. The battle was over, and humanity had not only survived, but had been the deciding force in the Coalition's victory. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Harlan stood at the observation window, watching the wreckage of the battlefield drift by. For the first time since the conflict began, there was a calm in the air. He turned to Lieutenant Mara, who was already busy managing the fleet's return to formation. "Damage report," Harlan asked, his voice steady. "Minimal losses, sir," Mara replied, glancing at her console. "Some of our rail gunships took heavy hits, but no critical systems are down. We'll have full operational capacity after minor repairs." Harlan nodded. It was a far better outcome than they had expected. In truth, he had prepared for far worse. Their alien allies had underestimated them, but Harlan knew that the human fleet's biggest strength was never in brute force. It was in their ability to think outside the box, to adapt when others couldn't. "Good," Harlan said, his gaze once again drifting toward the vastness of space. "Let's make sure everyone knows we're not just here to follow orders anymore. We lead." Meanwhile, in the war room aboard the Coalition's command ship, the alien warlords struggled to digest what had just transpired. Grail, who had been vocal in his disdain for the humans, sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the final moments of the battle. The once mighty Harkat fleet had been reduced to debris, and the humans, those they had mocked and ridiculed, were the ones responsible for turning the tide. Ilrin, ever observant, broke the silence. "The humans, they've done what none of us could. Perhaps it's time we start viewing them as equals. The other warlords exchanged uneasy glances. Even Grail, his pride wounded but his pragmatism still intact, gave a reluctant nod. They've earned their place, he muttered. There's no denying that. Irin smiled subtly, knowing that this battle would change everything. The galaxy had long viewed humanity as a minor player, a species whose technology and military were far behind the great powers. But today, the humans had proven that their strength lay not in the raw power of their ships, but in their strategy, their resilience, and their ability to work as a unified force. As the alien warlords began to discuss the next steps, the shift in their attitudes was palpable. Where once there had been mockery and disdain, now there was respect, perhaps even a hint of fear. The humans had shown that they were not to be underestimated. Back on the Resolute, the mood was celebratory. The crew, who had faced ridicule from their alien allies, now stood tall. They had proven themselves in the heat of battle, and the galaxy had taken notice. Lieutenant Mara approached Harlan at the observation window, her face filled with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "Sir, we're receiving messages from the other coalition leaders. They're congratulating us on our victory." Harlan raised an eyebrow, amused. "Unsure they are. Funny how quickly respect comes once you've proven them wrong." Mara smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "What do you think happens now?" Harlan paused, considering the question. Now, we show them that this wasn't a fluke. We keep pushing forward. The galaxy is bigger than this one battle, and there are more enemies out there than just the Harkat. If we want to survive, we need to keep proving that we belong here, again and again. Mara nodded, understanding. "And the coalition, do you think they'll accept us fully now?" Harlan crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the stars. "They'll have no choice. Today, we didn't just fight, we led, and that's what they'll remember. But it won't be easy. We've just shown them how strong we are, and that's going to make some of them nervous. We'll need to be ready for what comes next." The weight of his words settled over the crew. The victory against the Harkat was a turning point, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter. The humans had earned their place in the coalition, but they knew that the galaxy was a dangerous and unpredictable place. Today, they had proven their strength. Tomorrow, they would need to defend it. As the fleet began to regroup, preparing for their return to the coalition's central command, Harlan allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey that had brought humanity to this point had been long and filled with challenges, but this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was still finding its place within it. But now they knew one thing for certain: they belonged. Back in the war room, Grail finally stood, his voice carrying the weight of his reluctant respect. "We owe the humans our gratitude. Without them, this battle would have been lost." Irin, ever the diplomat, smiled warmly. "And perhaps it is time we stop thinking of them as our lesser allies." Grail nodded solemnly. "Agreed. From this day forward, the humans are no longer just members of the coalition. They are leaders." The words echoed through the room, a recognition of the shift that had taken place. Humanity had come into its own, not just as a member of the coalition, but as a force that could shape the future of the galaxy. As the Resolute and its fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Harlan stood tall, his hands behind his back as he addressed the crew one last time. "We've done the impossible today. But don't forget, it's only impossible until it's done. Now we move forward. Humanity is here to stay." The crew cheered, their spirits high as the stars began to blur around them, the engines of the Resolute humming to life. In that moment, they knew that they had not just survived, they had thrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the human fleet vanished into hyperspace, the coalition leaders watched in awe. The humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The battle was over, but the story of humanity's rise had only just begun.